A lot of members from our community use CH Precision products, and they're wondering why are there so many modules, optional modules, because it's quite different from other products.
For sure,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yep.
There are many jokes. The most common is that CH components are like bunnies and they make more. So you always have more boxes. I'm looking for compensation from rack companies
Yeah.
because it needs more shelves. So people's systems grow. So it's a fundamental belief that we have in great audio, and that is the system can grow. It's actually, if we look at the hi-fi industry, it was born in England. That was really where audiophile started. And it started as do-it-yourself. And then it was expanding. You would add a power supply. For example, Name, great manufacturer. Different category, but wonderful manufacturer. And what do? You buy power supply, you buy another power supply, and you just keep making your same system better.
So do you have to put X1 on every machine?
Absolutely. Well, so the advantage. So the reason we do it this way, and it's also part of our pricing structure, and our products are all very expensive. That we understand and we respect.
Right.
So this is not to make fun of the very high cost to enter. However, there's also something to be said for value. So in the digital world is the greatest example. When you purchase a DAC, in about 4 hours, it's been replaced by a better one. So now you have to sell it. And then you sell it for a fraction of what you paid for it because it's already old. And then you buy a new one for more money. And this goes on and you never achieve nirvana. So with our products, our goal is to have a moving platform. So all of our products have a card cage where we can add different inputs over time. If you purchase those inputs or features when you first buy the item or in 2 years, it's the same price.
First, when I saw C1, I was surprised that it didn't have the USB port in there.
That's right. But we have a USB board, and whether you purchase the new C1.2 with it today or you add the board later, it's the same price. It requires your dealer to bring a number 10 Torx wrench and 2 screws. It is user upgradable. And although we don't usually like the users to do it, we want the dealer to do it, but it can be done in the home. So you don't need to take the C1.2 and send it back to Switzerland and hope that FedEx doesn't drop it. Once you have it at home and it works, we can do those upgrades. And the C1's a great example. First product. The C1 came out and we sold quite a few. And quite a few here into Korea. We upgraded in 2019. We changed the digital board, the input board, to a high resolution board, a new higher performance board. At the same time, we also upgraded, almost the same time, we made a change and offered a new Ethernet board. The Ethernet board is, we call it Ethernet HD. The most obvious difference is that the new board features Rune, which the original board didn't. There's some other performance advantages, but that's the key. When somebody asks me which board do I have, I ask, do you have Rune? If they say no, it's the old board. I'll use US price just because it's hard to remember all currencies around the world. So the Ethernet HD board is $6,000. If you had an original C1 about 10 years ago, we could upgrade that digital or that Ethernet HD board not for $6,000. We give you a trade-in allowance, and it's $3,000. So we introduced the new C1.2 in Munich high-end last May. So the C1.2 was same in Europe. It's 4,000 euro or $4,000 more expensive than the C1. All that it requires for the upgrade is that your C1 must be current. So it has to have, we put a new better display in 2020, so it must have the new higher res display, must have, if you have streaming, the new HD board, and the same with the digital board. It would need all of those upgrades. But the cost of the upgrade is the same 4,000 euro or $4,000. So you don't lose having to sell the C1 at a tremendous loss because it's out of date. And in fact, your C1, when it becomes a C1.2, gets a new serial number. So it's treated as a brand new C1.
Why is it 1.2?
That's a great question. So Why the name? So the 0.5 for us designates a complete rethinking.
Okay.
So for example, our first amplifier was a C, or was the A1. It was the same size as a source component. Then the next amp was an A1.5. It's half again as big. I can share no parts. It's a complete redesign.
Okay.
Yeah. We offered a trade-in. So if somebody had an A1, they could give it back to us. We would sell them at a reduced price a new A1.5. The 0.2 or 0.1 that we did on the M1, M1.1, is a partial, it's fundamentally, it's based on the same platform. So for example, the C1, the digital to analog section, which is a big misunderstanding in the audio industry. Conversion from digital to analog has not changed. Yet every manufacturer wants to tell you of their new DAC. Well, that's because in the DAC, they're doing DSP. We disagree with doing DSP in the DAC. We use the DAC, the digital to analog converter, purely for digital to analog conversion. All of our DSP is done external before the DACs. It makes it quieter. It's a better performing piece. The C1 was based on 8 1704 PCM DACs. We use the same DACs in the C1.2.
Isn't it a little bit old?
Old? There's been no change in from ones and zeros to analog. What's changed is DSP. So when you upgrade to a C1.2, yes, it's the same 1704 DACs, which are famous for being the best DACs ever made. Not DSP, but they're not DSP. They are digital to analog converters. We use 4 of them in a very linear manner. And so the C1.2 is the same. But everything in front of that is new. And so there's 3 boards, backplane, MCU, and PSU. It's all changed. So it's a pretty significant difference. But fundamentally, because the DACs are based on the same platform as a C1, we did not want to call it a C1.5. Someday, we will have a C1.5. But digital converters have to change in order to really go that far. And that part of the industry hasn't changed.
So what kind of things have been changed?
So I mentioned that we do all of our DSP starts with our own math, right? So the Peter spline filters. We're not the first people to do spline filters. Pioneer Legato was a spline filter. So that kind of calculation, it's math, has been done before. The advantage to spline filters is speed of calculation. Think of this in an analog form. Short signal path. The longer a signal stays inside of your amplifier or your line stage, it picks up noise, right? Well, the longer you're calculating, the same thing. So I can theoretically make an even more perfect flat frequency response. But human hearing is actually very crude when it comes to amplitude, right? Frequency response and amplitude. We don't hear much difference. And so if you look at specifications of all DACs, they're all within flat frequency response by human hearing. The difference is in the timing domain. Short signal path, timing domain. So there's a beautiful mirror. They're similar. In this case, math versus an analog circuit, but it's the same philosophical approach. So the spline filters allow us to calculate more quickly, and that allows us to keep things in greater time. We don't have time, we call it smearing. And that is in the very low level information that is the difference between the artist being in your room or not. It's how close you get to the music. So we changed from a floating point calculation to a fixed point. That's a big difference in the case of the C1.2 versus C1.
How does it make sound different?
Every one of the differences is a cumulative. So that's one difference, is the different using a fixed point versus floating point. We also do our upsampling different than anybody else that I'm aware of. We do what's called synchronous upsampling. Everything is upsampled 16 times. The industry, as far as we know everybody else, is doing asynchronous upsampling. What that means is you take a sample. Let's say it's a CD, 1644.1. We take a sample, and then we calculate 16 new bits. We do synchronous. What that means is this sample comes over here, and I'm calculating 15 more.
Yeah.
So I still have 16,
Right.
but I keep a connection to the original.
Okay.
So again, timing domain. I still always reference to the original sample, and that's a very unique difference.
Yeah.
Very unique difference. And again, I don't know anybody else that's doing that, but
Right.
we don't own that, so somebody could.
Yeah.
So the combination, fixed point, the upsampling. The C1.2 has over 4 times the processing power of the C1.
Okay.
Think of an amplifier. You have a bigger amplifier, even the more modest levels, it's easier. So it's a bigger, more powerful computer, if you will.
So how did the computing power change?
It's better technology. That's just the evolution. In 12 years,
Okay.
we can do things better. So if you will, the calculations, it's still 16-bit. It's more efficient because the processing, it's 4 times the power.
All right.
We also replaced the clocks, and so this was an interesting story. The C1
Yeah.
had 2 clocks, and it's very much like most other digital manufacturers that sell external clocks.
Right.
When you do something in a multiple of 44.1, you use 1 clock,
Right.
and when you do something in a multiple of 48,
Yeah.
you use a separate clock.
Right.
Right. So 88.2, 44.1 uses the same clock,
Right.
and then for 48, 96, and 192, you'd
Right.
use a different clock.
Right.
So in the C1, we had the 2 clocks, and it would use the correct one. The other one was still working. Right? So it was there. It wasn't in the signal, but it was
Exactly.
still there.
Yeah.
In the C1.2, we use a new technology, a new kind of clock, a MEMS clock that reconfigures.
Okay.
So it's 1 clock that reconfigures depending on the multiple, and there's no other clock in the background.
Okay.
This all helps lower noise floor. There's less stuff
Right.
happening.
Right.
Right? We also, a lot of extensive work within power supply and isolation within the unit, separating areas. So,
So lower
everything
the
was,
noise.
yeah. So we lower the noise floor, we increase the calculating so it's more relaxed. We went to fixed point instead of floating point,
Right.
and the end result, when you do an A-B comparison, is yes, the C1 is a phenomenal sounding piece. But when you hear a C1.2, it's as though you removed a blanket.
Okay.
It's just more there. Well, we were doing demonstrations today. I was pointing out to my new friend in crime here, I was pointing out people in the room that were swaying to the music and dancing to the music.
Yeah.
You don't see that in hi-fi shows, because hi-fi shows are kind of like a metronome. Everything is precise, it's perfect, but you don't feel the bass player swinging.
All right.
What makes Christian McBride better than another really proficient bass player? And so it's things like that that the C1.2 just does better. It gets out of the way, and that's one thing you will read in the reviews of CH,
Right.
that it's a consistent refrain. The line stages are the perfect example. How do you describe not making sound?
Yeah.
Because that's what we're known for, getting out of the way of the music.
All right.
Digital domain, not easy.
Right. You're right.
So.